By the time a human being is 6 years old, they're usually in formal schooling with wide open minds, really ready to learn. You're learning that maybe you can't bring peanut butter in because some classmates might be allergic to peanuts, which shows you how to be a considerate citizen. You're learning that you can't call Suzie an idiot because words have power. That baking soda and vinegar can propel that paper mache volcano, as in science is real. And that when adults say maybe, as in maybe we'll go to get ice cream for lunch, they're not always telling the truth, developing critical thinking skills. Why all this talk about being 6 years old? Well, you might have guessed it. Here at Dear White Women, we are wrapping up year 6 of this podcast, which makes us as a platform similar in many ways to that small human that we were just talking about. A lot of this has been a journey in a lot of those skills for us. And hopefully you have also learned a little bit about those skills and then some along this journey of 270 episodes and counting.
So here's to where we've been and where we're going as we move into our 7th year of podcasting. And to everyone who's asking, so you all done now? We say, given everything that's going on in the world, and specifically in the United States since, say January 20th, 2025, we've got a never-ending supply of topics. So suffice it to say, we still got a lot more to talk about with each other and with you. And we'll soon be sharing with you how we're changing this platform to give us the ability to say even more. I know that's hard to believe, but even more. Thanks, as always, for listening.
Welcome to the Dear White Women podcast, the show that helps white women use their privilege to uproot systemic racism without centering themselves in the process. We are your multi-ethnic co-hosts, Sarah and Misasha. Misasha, one of the questions you and I get asked the most is, how and why did we start this podcast way back in 2019? Could you recap that for our newer listeners who, I don't know, may not want to go all the way back to episode 1?
First, I would like to say that I love that you asked me this question before I could ask you this question. So noted, my friend.
Early bird gets the worm.
Yes. So, I think that, and I'm going to keep this somewhat short, right? Because I'm going to start with the goal, right? And the goal is to broaden the narrative. And what I mean by that is that in this country, and especially now, we are being fed or have been taught to believe that there is a dominant narrative of existence in this country, right? One that has, sort of from the start of our country been focused on like white landowning men. We can add on certain terms to that, like cisgender and, able-bodied and a whole bunch of other qualifiers. But the history and the experiences that have been told and upheld, and a lot of ones that we learned in school and that our administration is trying to have us return to, are those people's experiences. But Sarah, those are not your and my experiences in this country. And I think that now going back, almost 7 years, we were not seeing those experiences reflected in our own communities. And especially as being mothers of children whose experiences wildly diverge from those narratives, we were thinking about how do we make this, our communities, embrace a much larger narrative, right? Like, how do we care not just about some of us, but how do we care about all of us? And so I think fundamentally, that's what caused us to start this platform, and in particular, call it Dear White Women, because our communities, the ones that we live in, you and I specifically, but a lot of other people, are full of white women. And we knew very viscerally, by virtue of being multi-ethnic, but not always having people know or view us as multi-ethnic, what was being said in those circles that we were in that were full of white women, specifically what was being said, what was not being said. And this is the quiet part, right? What was being said when these circles of women believed that there were no non-white women in the space. And so with all that knowledge, like, we know how to talk to white women. We know how to talk to multi-ethnic communities. We know how and why that narrative should be bigger. And so That's why we started this platform to see if we could make even a small difference, maybe just for our 5 family members who found us. And it's been so much more than that. So that's our story in a nutshell. Anything I missed that you want to add?
I think you hit the nail on the head. No, you're good.
Okay, so I'm going to ask you a question now. In telling that story, right, I was talking a little bit about the why of why we created this platform, but we always say that knowing your why, right, why you, the listener, why you, Sarah, right, like move through the world and do what you do. And especially now, knowing your why is what propels us through hard times. So I know we do this every year, but I'm going to ask you again. What's your why and how has any of this evolved for you? Since the inception of this podcast, or even really in this last year since we had this conversation, year over year.
Well, what I don't understand is why you ask this question year over year, and I cry every year at this answer. But I think it speaks to the depth of my truth when I share it. When we first started this show, and one of the things you didn't mention, yes, we are Japanese and white, you and I both, the daughter of a Japanese immigrant parent and a white American parent each. But what we haven't said, and we don't say explicitly on the show all that often, is that while I am married to a white Canadian man and our teenage girls are presumed to be white, you are married to a black man and your kids, who are very multi-ethnic, are just presumed to be black kids. And the world sees them as black boys. And when we first started this show, I love you. You are my best friend of over 25 years. We don't need to go into how many more years, over 25 years we've known each other since
We
we
don't
met in
have that kind of
college.
time.
Yeah, but at first it was knowing what we knew about the systems and the discrimination and the hurt that was happening in the United States against black boys in particular. And as we have done this show over and over, and keep in mind, we started this conversation before George Floyd's murder. And then a lot of people became even more interested in this conversation. And then a lot of people became disinterested. One of those quiet conversations you mentioned was at a book club with all white women except for me, where we were reading a book by a black author about the black narrative. And they said, they pushed it to the center of the table and said, aren't we done talking about racism yet? And that's the kind of stuff that was originally in my why. And I'm really glad that we focused on that, because if we could even change the perspective of one person who would harm your boys or anybody who looks like them, then I feel like all of the work and the learning and everything was worth it. It made a difference. And as despite having gone to Harvard and had a great education and thinking I knew a lot, I realized how little I actually knew about how the systems of discrimination are baked into our society. And I think as the more I've learned, the more it's not only for your boys, but it's also for me. And it's also for my kids and for everybody else, because I've learned how intertwined these systems all are. And I think it is a relevant topic for all of us to understand the baseline history. And then all of a sudden to understand that so that we can make a difference in a way that's respectful to all of those impacted by these systems. Like, I need us to make a difference for all kids who feel different and who are made to feel different, or who are like made to feel worse for who they are. So that is where I'm at, especially over this last year, just seeing how relevant this is to everyone in our country. I didn't cry.
I know. Whoa, it is
I
a
did.
new
I mean,
year.
I was choked up and I had a tear right here in my eyeball that was like lingering on the edge, but I did it. I did it. I did it.
Oh, I love you, friend.
I love you too. So, having said all of that, do you want to talk about your why, or do you want to talk about this last year and the episodes we've had?
I want to talk about how my why has shifted a little bit over this last year, because I think, and especially since January 20th, because I think something that we do really well is storytell. In particular, all those stories that fall outside of that dominant narrative, or, what I think is being sold to us as the American story, right? Which it is not in full at all. And I think now that we are seeing the rapid attempt to erase anything but that dominant narrative one more time, because, For the people whose history is the dominant narrative, that's worked out real well for them. It's going to work out forever for them. Like I'm not worried about that group of people because that is who this, like all the systems were built by and for, right? And I think we're seeing that in very real time, like, and just how small that group of people really is, but how much control they have over those systems that you were talking about, Sarah, right? The systems that really hurt all of us. And I think now more so than before, like when I think about that question that we've talked about a number of times on the podcast, like what side of history will you be on, right? Like when your kids or when your grandkids ask you what you did during this time period, I want to say that, you know, you and I used our voices and told all the stories that we could, right? Told all the truth that we could find about the history of our country and about why it is so important to have all these stories in there and to really fight against the systems that hold us back. Because, and we did that knowing that we live in a time where doing that not only could be unpopular, but it could be very risky. That's what I want to be able to say, you know? And so I feel like there is no choice, right? But to do this. So that's how it's shifted, especially, you know, over the past year. So,
Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense.
okay. So shifting gears and thinking about this past year, what's the episode from this last year, Sarah, that you wished more people listened to and learned from and acted on, you know, or what was your favorite episode to work on?
I don't think I could limit it to just one. I love so many of our conversations that spanned the trajectory of theory into action, right? Like we didn't just live in this is how to think about it, but we often ground it in here's what you're going to do about it. And so I feel like one underrated show was our conversation with Dr. Marissa G. Franco on friendships in this day and age of loneliness. I feel like so many people say they don't either have time for friends, they don't know how to make friends, how do you nurture friendships? But episode 259 was a very powerful one that I think because it came out towards the summer, we didn't get to talk about as much. So I hope everyone listens to that. And then I think one more that I want to mention is the one actually right after that, episode 260 on anti-ableism. That book and that conversation with Tiffany Yu like completely shifted my understanding of disability. It shifted my vocabulary around it. It shifted my approach to how I think about it. So, and it was very practical. So I loved that conversation and book and continue to recommend that to a lot of folks. How about you?
You know, I thought about this one and I think it's kind of the same episodes for me, the ones in which we talk about Donald Trump as like your fifth grade bully. And because I feel like, so those were really fun to write and work on because I feel like, well, first of all, the parallels are infinite. And, you know, it wrote itself, kind of only half kidding on that one. But, you know, and I feel like if I'm being real honest, the level of frustration that like we were shouting this perhaps into a void, perhaps to people, and we're still here in this like sort of after seeing all the warning signs pointing to exactly what's happening right now, right? But to see it from that perspective gives me insight into like why these things are happening the way they are, right? Because like A, he told us they were going to happen this way. B, he acts exactly like a fifth grade bully, right? And C, like there is no bigger plan, right? Because it's cruel and it's because like this is your impulse and this is your knee-jerk reaction and this is what happens when you don't have accountability in your life, right? Like I think we said all these things and they all came true, which never happens. P.S. Like in my life, like I never say things that always come true, but apparently Trump is the gift that keeps on giving. But I am serious though, like those episodes, like, you know, I feel really good about those, not about what we said in those, but in that process.
And I feel incredible. I echo that we were very clear on our views and we try to give other people the mic and be less judgmental. But I feel like we needed to say what was said in those episodes. And I'm really, really glad we did those too. Way to use our voice and speak up. Woohoo.
Yep. Well, and speaking of speaking, right? Let's segue a little bit because I know this is like sort of recap of year 6, but it also is looking forward to year 7. And so I want to talk a little bit about the 2 topics we're focusing on this year, because outside of the podcast, we do work as keynote speakers, as workshop leaders, as general conversationalists. And, as background, here's the work that we've been doing outside of, us coming to you through your podcast feed, right? Over the last several years, and especially after the publication of our first book in 2021, we've spoken at organizations including Fidelity, Ibotta, Carta, UC Santa Cruz, just to name a few.
Yeah, I mean, Misasha has run a number of workshops on civil discourse, on equity and inclusion, and hidden parts of American history for K through 12 schools, which includes directly to the students, to parents, to affinity groups, and school administrators. And Misasha also keynotes for companies, CLEs for law firms, and also moderates and speaks on panels regarding inclusion, belonging, implicit bias, and civil discourse.
Yeah, and Sarah MCs events like the World Happiness Summit, the Extraordinary Women on Board Summit, and has moderated conversations at the American Psychological Association's convention. And together this year, we're focusing on 2 main topics that really combine stories, history, psychology, and actionable steps. And those 2 are how to have difficult conversations and why belonging still matters. And, we'd love to come talk to your company, your ERGs, your schools, or any other groups that you're a part of. So please reach out via our website or via social. All that info is in our show notes, as we'd love to connect.
Also, as an asterisk important note following what you just said, because people have asked, yes, it is a difficult time in the United States right now for anyone involved in DEI work in any capacity due to our administration's incredibly large anti-DEI push. We are especially aware because doors have been closed to us due to our platform's name. And yet these are the conversations that we're focusing on humanity, about all of our differences, about identity, respect, inclusion. All of these topics are still relevant and are still very, very important. Our message is going to remain the same, regardless of what our country's current leadership would have us ban, censor, or forget.
Because, quite honestly, we've got a lot to tackle, right? We are increasingly in a society that has influential leaders flashing Nazi salutes, government programs which support our daily lives being dismantled, and the threat of a unitary executive power pushing us to fight for our democracy or lose it, possibly forever. There is no time left to outsource resistance to other people. You, all of our listeners, have to do something. And as Cory Booker put it in his historic speech on the Senate floor, something more than what you've currently been doing. Do something more. And that doesn't have to be big, but it also does have to be more than, let's say, a performative social media post, or simply thinking about what you would do if you had more time or money or influence or you name it, right? So tell us, what are you going to do?
Listen in to learn more, because we've got some experts scheduled for our summer series to talk to us about how we can be better humans. And we've got some big changes lined up for the podcast as well. Because, Misasha,
it's all of us or none of us.
You've just listened to the Dear White Women podcast with your hosts, Sarah and Misasha. Yes, we're on social media. And yes, you can hire us to do talks about our book. But the biggest thing, don't forget to sign up for our newsletter to receive our free materials. Head over to dearwhitewomen.com to get on the list.